Imagine for a moment that you
Yeah.
set off on this epic journey, right? To discover a brand new unexplored continent.
Okay.
You've braced yourself for the unknown, for, exotic landscapes, totally foreign
Right.
customs.
The full adventure.
But then as you step ashore, you realize with a jolt, maybe even like happy tears,
Yeah.
you've just landed back home.
Oh.
Not just home, but your old home, but seen completely fresh, like for
Yeah.
the very first time. That's the feeling G.K. Chesterton talks about, and it's really the heart of our deep dive today.
That feeling, yeah, that simultaneous encounter with the fascinating terrors of going abroad, but also the humane security of coming home, that's a tension he really hones in on.
Attention.
Yeah, he sees it as this fundamental human need. We need to be like astonished by the world, but also feel completely at home in it. It's not just some quirky observation, it's the problem he thinks his philosophy actually solves.
Exactly. So we're digging into excerpts from G.K. Chesterton's classic Orthodox Why,
Huh.
published way back in 1908.
A foundational text for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a book he, decided to write. It was a direct response. People challenged him after his earlier book, Heretics.
They basically said, okay, smart guy, what do you believe?
Pretty much. They dared him to lay out his own cosmic theory. And Chesterton's reply is just amazing, kind of humble, but bold too. He says, look, I didn't invent this philosophy.
He says, God and humanity made it, and it made me, which is quite a claim.
It really is. So our mission here is to sort of explore Chesterton's way of seeing things, his set of mental pictures, as he calls them.
Right, not getting lost in like rigid logical proofs, but understanding the feel of his thought.
Yeah. How did he land on a philosophy that answers this double spiritual need he talks about?
Mhm.
This mix of the known and the unknown, what he calls romance.
And we'll see how his ideas really push against, conventional wisdom. They offer this surprisingly lively path to being, as he puts it, truly well-informed.
Okay, so where does Chesterton start this journey? It's kind of surprising he says it begins near the neighborhood of the madhouse,
Wow, okay. That's provocative.
isn't it? He tells this story about a conversation where he just blurts out that the men who really believe in themselves are all in lunatic asylums.
Strong stuff. Implying complete self-confidence is actually a weakness.
Exactly. And his friend, who was a publisher, asked the killer question. Well, if a man is not to believe in himself, in what is he to believe?
And this book, Orthodoxy, is basically his answer.
That's it. The whole deep dive is unpacking that answer.
It's really striking how he uses madness, not literally, but as a metaphor to look at modern thinking.
How so?
Well, he says, ancient creatures often started with the fact of sin, but modern thinkers, especially religious ones at the time, tended to downplay or deny sin.
Okay.
But, he points out, nobody denies lunatic asylums exist. So he suggests this test for modern ideas.
Hmm.
Do they tend to make a person, lose his wits?
That's a really interesting lens, a kind of sanity check for philosophies. And what does he mean by losing his wits? Not just being irrational, is it?
No, quite the opposite, actually. This is key. He argues insanity isn't a lack of reason. It's reason working in isolation.
Isolated from what?
From everything else, from common sense, from intuition, from what he calls sane affections. The madman, for Chesterton, isn't unreasonable. He's often a fantastic reasoner.
Yeah. Trapped in his own logic.
Exactly. His mind becomes more logical because it's lost that balance. He's lost everything except his reason. It's this horrible clarity, seeing too much cause in everything.
Chilling? And he gives examples, right?
Yeah, vivid ones. The guy who sees conspiracies everywhere, or the one who thinks he's the king of England, or even Christ.
And their logic makes sense to them.
Totally. He says their explanations are complete and purely rational within their system. You can't actually argue them out of it using logic alone.
So if their logic is, like, airtight in its own way, how do we know they're wrong? How do we judge from the outside?
That's the million-dollar question. Chesterton's answer is that their minds move in a perfect but narrow circle.
Perfect but narrow.
Right. The explanation is complete, sure, but it's not so large. It covers its own little patch but leaves out huge chunks of reality.
So you can't argue, you have
Yeah.
to, broaden their horizons.
Kind of. He says the cure is an argument, it's to give it air, to show them that life, reality, is just vastly larger if their own little self could become smaller and more open.
And this isn't just about people in asylums. He takes this idea and applies it more broadly.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really provocative. He says most modern thinkers, well, the ones he was critiquing, show this same pattern. Expansive and exhaustive reason combined with contracted common sense. Meaning they stretch one single idea, one thin explanation way too far, like a pattern you can repeat forever, but it stays small.
Okay, give me an example.
Materialism is his big one. He says it has an insane simplicity.
Insane simplicity? How?
Because it claims to explain everything, reducing it all to matter and energy. But in doing so, she argues, it leaves everything truly human out.
Like what?
Like fighting peoples or proud mothers or first love or fear upon the sea. All the stuff that makes life rich and complex. He even calls the materialist universe the smallest hole that a man can hide his head in.
Wow. So he's flipping the script. He's saying materialism, which claims to be open-minded and scientific, is actually more limiting than, say, religion.
Precisely. That's his counterintuitive point. A Christian, he says, can hold seemingly contradictory ideas together, like believing in cause and effect and the possibility of miracles. There's room for both.
But the materialist.
The strict materialist, in Chesterton's view, isn't allowed to admit even the slightest speck of spiritualism or miracle. He has to shut that door.
He even makes that joke about Mr. McCabe, the rationalist, being a slave because he's not allowed to believe in fairies.
Exactly. It's that intellectual confinement he's pointing at. And he sees this extending to things like fatalism, the idea that everything is predetermined. He calls that the worst chain because it destroys human agency, humanity itself.
So extreme skepticism, or thinking everything just starts and ends with your own mind. These are just different versions of the same trap.
That's how Chesterton sees it. Like the madman's logic, these philosophies might seem complete in theory, but they're crippling in practice.
They trap you.
Right, in a small and cramped eternity. His image for this is powerful. A serpent with his tail in his mouth, always circling back on itself, never breaking out.
So if reason alone, pushed to its extreme, leads to this kind of narrowness or even madness, what's the antidote? What keeps us grounded?
It sounds almost contradictory at first, but he says, mysticism keeps men sane.
Mysticism, not reason.
Not reason alone. He argues the ordinary man has always been sane because the ordinary man has always been a mystic.
What does he mean by mystic here? Not like gurus on mountaintops.
No, more like having an intuitive grasp of reality's complexity. Keeping one foot in earth and the other in fairyland, as he puts it. Preferring the whole truth, even if it seems messy, over a neat but incomplete logical system.
Seeing two different pictures at once, and yet sees all the better for that.
Exactly. And how does mysticism achieve this? Chesterton's idea is that it works by allowing one thing to be mysterious and everything else becomes lucid.
Okay, unpack that. How does mystery make things clearer?
Think about his symbols. Reason and madness are like a circle. Perfect, rational, but closed and limited in size. It always comes back on itself.
Right.
But the symbol for mystery and health, he suggests, is the cross.
The cross. Why?
Because it has a collision and a contradiction right at its center. Two lines meeting, seemingly in opposition, but because of that tension, it can extend its forearms forever without altering its shape.
So it's open-ended, it points outwards.
Exactly. It's a signpost for free travelers, not a closed loop. It acknowledges mystery at the heart of things, which paradoxically opens up the rest of the world.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. He talks about paradoxes within Christianity itself, right?
Yeah.
And he has this critique of the modern world. Not that it's evil, but that it's far too good. What's that about?
Yeah, it's another classic Chestertonian twist. He thinks the problem isn't necessarily vice, but virtues that have gone wild because they're isolated.
Wild virtues.
Like what? Like truthfulness without any pity, or pity that's completely untruthful because it won't face hard facts. These isolated virtues, he says, do more terrible damage than straightforward badness.
And he connects this to humility.
Yes, specifically humility in the wrong place. He thinks his era, and maybe ours too, is marked by people being really unsure about objective truth, but totally confident in their own subjective opinions.
Doubtful about the truth, but undoubting about himself.
That's the phrase. And this leads him to this idea of the suicide of thought.
Suicide of thought, that sounds traumatic.
It is. He argues that the human intellect, if completely free and unchecked, can actually reason itself into oblivion. It starts doubting the validity of its own thoughts.
So reason needs some kind of foundation, some kind of faith, even to believe in reason itself.
That's exactly his point. The complete skeptic eventually reasons away his own right to reason. He needs an authority, something outside himself, which for Chesterton is religious authority to act as a barrier protecting reason from self-destructing.
So insofar as religion is gone, reason is going. That's a really challenging idea.
It absolutely is. It completely reverses the usual narrative that religion hinders reason.
Okay, let's connect this to another idea, the cosmic patriot. What does he mean by that?
This is about our basic relationship to existence itself. He argues that you sort of belong to the world before you even ask if you like it or not.
Like loyalty to your country even before you fully understand it?
Exactly. A loyalty long before he has any admiration. It's a basic affirmation of life. And for Chesterton, the only real optimism is this kind of universal patriotism loving life, just because it is without a reason.
And how does this connect to something like suicide?
He sees suicide as the ultimate rejection of this loyalty. It's the sin, the ultimate and absolute evil, because it's a fundamental refusal to take an interest in existence.
Wow. He says the man who kills himself kills all men. He wipes out the world. That's incredibly strong.
It is. And he contrasts that sharply with the martyr. The suicide destroys existence for themselves, while the martyr dies that something may live. Christianity, he notes, is furious for the martyr and furiously against the suicide. It defends that basic loyalty to life.
This ties into his idea that the world isn't perfectly logical, right? It's nearly reasonable, but not quite.
Yeah, he calls it a trap for logicians. Pure logic will lead you astray sometimes. Like his example of the human body logic might suggest perfect symmetry, maybe a second heart, but reality is different.
So when Christianity seems illogical,
Chesterton claims that's often when it's stumbled upon illogical truth. Something true about the messy reality of the world that pure logic misses. It expects the unexpected.
and this actually connects to his own conversion, or his path back to Orthodoxy. He read skeptics, and that somehow confirmed his faith.
Isn't that fascinating? He says reading Huxley, Spencer, Bradlow, the big rationalists and atheists of his day, reading their arguments against religion, actually sowed his first wild doubts of doubt.
Doubts of doubt.
Yeah. Their own certainty and perhaps their own perceived narrowness made him question his own skepticism. He ends that section, quoting scripture, almost surprised himself. Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian.
So what was the final thing that clicked for him? What made Christianity seem uniquely true?
It was this dawning, slow, and awful impression, as he calls it, that Christianity was extraordinary because it held so many contradictory things together.
Paradoxes again.
Exactly. All the criticisms thrown at it seem to cancel each other out. It's accused of being too pessimistic about humanity and too optimistic about God, too meek and too warlike, anti-family and pro-family, too plain and too ritualistic.
How can it be all those things at once?
That was his still thunderbolt moment. Maybe, he thought, it's not that Christianity is contradictory. Maybe it's just the right shape for a contradictory reality, and maybe its critics are the ones who are mad in various ways, each focusing on only one side of the truth.
He even points out contradictions in ordinary life, like fancy dinners and ugly clothes.
Right. He says maybe Christianity just reflects that complex reality better. He calls its core dynamic a superhuman paradox, whereby two opposite passions may blaze beside each other, held in tension, not canceling each other out.
And this duplex passion is the key to Christian ethics.
That's his argument. Take humility and pride. Christianity makes man haughtier than he had ever been before, created in God's image, chief of creatures, and humbler than he had ever been before, chief of sinners. Both extremes, held together.
Same with anger and love.
Yes, he says it allows both to run wild, but in a balanced way, leading to mental and emotional liberty rather than suppression or chaotic imbalance.
So it's not about finding a bland middle ground.
Not at all. He explicitly contrasts it with paganism, which he likens to a smooth, balanced marble pillar. Christianity, he says, is more like a huge and ragged and romantic rock.
A rock.
Yeah, with exaggerated excrescences, bits sticking out all over that exactly balance each other. It's a dynamic, wilder kind of balance.
And this allows for diversity, like monks fasting and people feasting, Germans being reverent, and French being experimental.
That's how he sees it. This underlying paradoxical structure allows for these seemingly opposite expressions to coexist within the same framework. It creates a larger space.
He even uses this to explain things like the intense theological debates, the monstrous wars about small points of theology. How does that fit?
He says it might seem like tiny points, only a matter of an inch, but an inch is everything when you are balancing.
Ah, like adjusting a tightrope walker's pole.
Exactly. The church had to be strict, like a lion tamer, defining doctrines precisely, so that ordinary people, the world, could be careless and free within those boundaries. Orthodoxy for him isn't safe and boring, it's a whirling adventure.
Okay, let's move into his thoughts on revolution and nature. He starts by saying, our era, despite looking busy, is actually marked by profound laziness and fatigue. What's he getting at?
He thinks all the apparent change and bustle lacks real direction. He criticizes modern ideals for being too vague. He picks on Nietzsche, for example.
Was his issue with Nietzsche?
He says Nietzsche uses these physical metaphors, beyond good and evil, upper man, because he can't or won't actually define what he means clearly. Chesterton calls him a very timid thinker for this reason.
So for Chesterton, real change, real reform, needs a clear goal.
Absolutely. He says reform implies form. You need a picture in your mind, an ideal you're aiming for, to actually change the world towards it.
If your ideal keeps changing, you just spin your wheels.
Right. If your favorite color changes every day, you'll never paint the room. He connects this to politics, too. Constant free thought, just endlessly changing your mind without settling on principles, actually prevents real reform. Because while everyone's debating abstract ideas, the machinery of matter, the status quo just keeps grinding on. He says, the only thing that remains after all the philosophies is the factory. The concrete reality doesn't change.
So you need fixed ideals even to rebel properly.
Yes. A strict rule is not only necessary for ruling, it is also necessary for rebelling.
Yeah.
You have to be revolting for something definite, something respectable, often rooted in old ideas that have proven their worth.
He brings up Darwinism here too, doesn't he? Saying it can support mad moralities, but not a sane one?
Yeah, he argues you can use survival of the fittest to justify either being utterly ruthless or overly sentimental about protecting the weak, but it doesn't give you a balanced, sane ethic on its own.
And this connects to how we view nature. This is a really interesting distinction he makes.
It really is. He says, only the supernatural has taken a sane view of nature. The common idea, nature is our mother, he thinks is dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because if nature is our mother, our authority, then we might feel obligated to imitate her indifference or cruelty, the nature red in tooth and claw aspect.
So what's the Christian view, according to him?
Christianity says nature is our sister.
Our sister. How does that change things?
Well, you can love your sister, be proud of her beauty, appreciate her, but she has no authority over us. We're related, but distinct. She doesn't dictate our morals.
And this gives Christian appreciation of the world a different feel.
He thinks so. A strange touch of lightness that is almost frivolity. You can enjoy the world without worshiping it or being enslaved by its darker aspects.
Chesterton certainly doesn't pull punches when talking about social issues, does he? Especially about the rich.
No, he's quite bracing. He argues that Christianity is really the only force that can genuinely question the power of the well-nurtured or the well-bred.
Why does he think that?
He observes that many modern arguments for social progress, ironically, end up justifying aristocracy. For instance, arguing the poor are purely products of their bad environment implies the rich are purely products of their good one, making their privilege seem inevitable or deserved.
That's a tricky point.
And he just states it bluntly. The rich man is bribed. He has been bribed already. That is why he is a rich man. Trusting the rich for him is quite certainly unchristian.
Wow, okay. And what about miracles? He flips the script on that too, right?
Yeah.
Saying disbelief is less liberal?
Yes. He attacks the fixed notion that it is more liberal to disbelieve in miracles than to believe in them. He says that's literally the opposite of the truth.
How so?
Because disbelief in miracles, he argues, often stems from a rigid faith in a fixed and godless fate. It's a commitment to a closed system, refusing to entertain possibilities beyond it.
Even if there's evidence.
Especially if there's evidence. He points to what he calls the choking cataract of human testimony in favor of the supernatural throughout history. He provocatively tells the rationalists, essentially, we Christians accept the evidence you guys refuse because your creed forces you to ignore it.
So for him, being open to the supernatural is actually more open-minded, more evidence-based in a way.
That's his claim. It's quite a turnaround. And this leads him to explain why he accepts Christianity as a whole, not just picking bits he likes.
As a living teacher?
Right, like a child trusting a father in the garden. He argues that other philosophies might say things that seem obviously true on the surface, but Christianity, he claims, has again and again said the thing that does not seem to be true, but is true when you look deeper.
And these unattractive ideas have practical benefits.
He thinks so. Take original sin. It sounds grim, right? But he argues it leads to pathos and brotherhood, because if we're all flawed, we can pity the beggar and distrust the king. It levels the playing field.
And the idea of spiritual danger, hell,
That sense of high stakes, he says, is the root of all drama and romance. It gives life meaning and consequence. Ultimately, he sees Christianity not as constricting freedom, but as the necessary frame for pagan freedom.
The strict frame preserves the wildness inside.
That's the paradox, like strong walls allowing old human life dancing like children safely within.
So boiling it all down, what's the absolute core argument about religion for Chesterton?
He says it turns on this question: whether a man who was born upside down can tell when he comes right way up.
Born upside down.
Meaning, is our ordinary natural state actually our true or healthy state? The primary paradox of Christianity, he says, is that the ordinary condition of man is not his sane or sensible condition, that the normal itself is an abnormality.
That's the doctrine of the fall, basically, that our default setting is somehow off.
Exactly. That's the inmost philosophy of the fall. And this, he believes, is the crucial difference.
How does he contrast this with, say, paganism or modern thought?
He argues that paganism found joy close to the earth, in small, concrete things, but became sadder the closer it got to ultimate questions, to the heavens. Modern man, he suggests, is similarly disoriented, metaphorically standing on his head.
And Christianity.
Christianity, he claims, satisfies our deep ancestral instinct for being the right way up. It puts things in perspective, making joy something gigantic and sadness something special and small, rather than the other way around. It reorients us.
Wow. We've certainly been on a whirling adventure through Chesterton's Orthodoxy here.
Definitely feels like one.
We've seen how his philosophy of paradox gives you this totally different way of looking at things. Seeing that superhuman paradox whereby two opposite passions may blaze beside each other.
Right, held in that dynamic tension.
It seems to be about finding a joy that doesn't try to tame life or simplify it, but actually embraces its wild, contradictory nature.
I think that's right. And connecting it all up, his main point really is about the ability, particularly within the Christian framework as he saw it, to hold these apparently irreconcilable things together. It's not static. It's incredibly dynamic.
Yeah.
And this whole deep dive really suggests that maybe the silence we sometimes feel from the universe isn't emptiness.
What is it then?
Well, Chesterton has that amazing line. Maybe it's not silence. Maybe the laughter of the heavens is too loud for us to hear.
That's quite an image. Okay, to leave everyone with a final thought to chew on. Chesterton ends his book reflecting on Christ himself.
A very powerful ending.
He notes that Christ showed his tears, showed his anger, but seemed to hide something else. He never concealed his tears, yet concealed something. He never restrained his anger, yet restrained something.
What does Chesterton think of?
His speculation, and he admits it's just a fancy, is that the hidden thing, the thing covered constantly by abrupt silence or impetuous isolation, was his mirth, his joy.
Wow, divine laughter.
Exactly. So consider that. What if the deepest mystery isn't suffering or judgment, but an absolutely boundless, overwhelming joy? A joy maybe too vast for us to fully grasp while we're here. Something to definitely mull over.